Tanse, Tanishi, Buju. Welcome back to the Traveling Métis podcast, the podcast where we dive into Métis culture. Do you hear that? That is the sound of the river, which can only mean one thing. It is time to grab your paddle and headphones and hop into your canoe, because we are heading down the river to talk to our fellow Michif storytellers. Welcome, my Michif friends and non-Michif listeners. I have heard from a lot of non-Indigenous people who are listening to this podcast. So merci for taking the time out of your day to celebrate and learn more about Métis people and culture. Today, we are here to do a lot of learning. We're still in Saskatchewan with one of my favorite people who I have gotten to know on my journey, writer Arnolda Dufour-Bowes. As you will hear in a moment, Arnolda has written plays, short stories, children's books, and much more. Not only about our broader Métis community, but specifically Road Allowance Métis. So if you're a fan of Tommy Douglas, you might want to skip this one because he's not remembered too fondly by the Métis community in Saskatchewan. For those of you who need a reminder on what Road Allowance Métis people are, a Cliff Notes version is basically when Métis were disenfranchised by the script system, they were sent to live on Crown land that was set aside for future development like roads, hence the name Road Allowance. But Arnolda has come a long way from her family's time as Road Allowance Métis people. She's become a seasoned traveler, as she describes herself, a jack of all trades. So I sat down with her to discuss her life and why she is drawn to being a storyteller. You've had so many experiences traveling and just so many different jobs. What made you pursue writing?
Well, it's been a part of my life since I was a kid. I think that's just something, I think all of us, either artists or writers, I think we can all go back, right, to when we were a kid and we've always been creating. Right. So writing for me, someone asked, well, when was the first award you won? I was like, well, I can tell you the first one I ever got, I was in grade 5. It was my first story that I wrote. And I remember I got chosen out of all, they chose 3 to get read up in front of everyone. And I remember that's the first moment one of my stories was acknowledged. And for me, that was a big moment, just realizing that, hey, I can actually do something. I was so nervous. I still remember what I wore that day. I was like, what am I going to wear? Like, people are going to be staring at me. I was like so nervous going up there. And I remember I even bought like a little tiny stuffy just to hang on to. Like I was so nervous. It was a little tiny brown puppy I had in my hand. It was a blue sweater and my khaki pants. But I just remember it because it was just, yeah, it was a big moment. And then just to realize that stories matter. And then from there, I think for the rest of my life, I always wrote. I think I wrote my first play. I was in grade 9 and my English teacher pulled me in. It was something on the little dark side and they were a little concerned. It's actually why they pulled me in.
It wasn't that you're a good writer. They're like, actually, I think your mental health might be.
Yeah, exactly. But it was good. But it was a dark. It had to do with sexual assault. So it was, but
Mm,
they said like it was overall, they said it was amazing, but they're like, they were just still concerned. So, but just writing from there and then poetry and songwriting, like, I don't know, I think that's also too just a part of the Métis way, right? We have music somewhere in our life, right? So
mm.
that was a big deal. And then you grow up and you have kids and you got to realize you got to pay bills and taxes. And so I became a nurse. And then I didn't go back. Like I always wrote, I always had tons of
Mm.
journals all over the place. But it wasn't until I started homeschooling our kids. We were living in the Middle East. And for me, because reading was always so important to me, like I've just ferocious reader, and I wanted my children to have that same love for
Yeah.
literature. And I'm very proud to say that all three of them are big, big readers. Absolutely love that. But none of them want anything to do with the arts. They're all into the sciences.
So that didn't trickle down to,
It did not, although they are also artistic and creative. I think when they get older, they'll turn back to it, right? Kind of like me,
mm,
right? I think but they're in that mindset of I need to get a job, I need to get an education. Okay, I'm going into sciences. One's going into medical, one's going into agriculture, and the other one's going to physiotherapy, right? But I think as they grow up, maybe if they have kids, if they decide to, or later on, I think that's going to become their source of just, for me, it's just that source of freedom, right? The arts is such a beautiful place. I
yeah.
think they'll use it later on because I've seen them, whether it's drawing or even their writing, their music. Two of them were involved in theater. They were all involved in music. So in them, but right now I think they're suppressing it. But but we did tons of reading and tons of writing exercises. And it was during that time when I started to write more again. And because I wasn't nursing at that point. And then by the time we came back, my nursing license was up. And so I couldn't even go back to teaching because I was actually teaching at the one Indigenous college here in Saskatoon.
Mm.
And I was like, hey, well, what am I going to do? And at that point, my partner at the time, he said, well, just go into whatever it is you've always wanted to do. You have a chance to go back to school, whether it's nursing or whatever. I was like, okay. So I started taking creative writing classes. And then that's when I got into one of the classes with Guy Vanderhaeg, and it was an advanced creative writing class. And he just encouraged me. He just told me, he said, just write. And he said, you have something here, just continue it. I'm like, okay. And then, yeah, so it's kind of trickled from there. And then here I am.
Do you think those experiences though, like as a writer, because they always say like write what you know, and it's like a lot of writers, it's like you kind of have to have like a lived experience, right, to have something to write about. Like, do you think that was kind of a benefit, like maybe pursuing more of a career in like writing and the arts later in life?
For me, definitely. Like some people can write off, I think, as soon as they're ready. But for me, probably just growing up, um, physically, mentally, emotionally, everything, right? But for me, because I know actually I was registered at the U of R's journalism program. And I was in it just for the summer and actually got invited to go down to what was it? The Indigenous Journalism conference that they had down in Arizona. And we were down there for a week. And so I was supposed to go into journalism at that point, and
Mm.
my plan was to go into more creative writing rather than anything to do with news. But um, things just didn't work out. And yeah, I started traveling the world. I toured New Zealand for like a year and a half off and on. And then, yeah, even with nursing, I was in Indonesia and stuff like that. So it was life took over, the world took over. But it was always, like I said, writing was always a part of my life.
Yeah, and in terms of yeah, like your Métis heritage and culture, like how do you think that's like I know obviously reading your books and things like that, obviously it has influenced your writing, but yeah, like how does that sort of play into like the stories you want to tell and maybe like your point of view of the world?
Oh, definitely. Like I think too, just because growing up, that was just something my parents, especially my dad, really I don't want to say pushed. It wasn't pushed. It was just something that he ingrained in us, that we were Métis and we were proud. We needed to be proud of who we were, like after all the struggles our people have gone through. He just wanted us to be so proud of who we were as a nation. And that was just something that I grew up, right?
Mm.
We were Gabriel Dumont dancer, and my mom used to, be our instructor, and we used to tour with, the jigging groups, and fiddle music was always a part of our life. Like it's just I grew up around it. It wasn't even a question
Mm.
of who I was. So to go into writing and writing about it, it was natural. Like it's an expression of who you are. And like you said, you write what you know.
Yeah.
So the story like Maggie Lou, that came out of the fact of when I was homeschooling my kids and getting them to read, I couldn't find anything that was Métis specific that would speak to my kids at their age group where they were that was contemporary.
Mm.
Like I could find a lot of other, indigenous stories, Johnny on the trap line, it's like, but it was stories that they couldn't connect with. Like I wanted something contemporary that they could connect with, especially my girls. And I just, that's kind of where that all got born out of. And I was like, well, I just wanted it to be an everyday family. Like it's just normal to, have cookum and mushroom in and around the house and aunties and uncles flying in and out and all working together. And that's what that whole story is. It's about family and,
Mm.
giving each other funny nicknames or, and like razzing each other all the time or someone who has really, really bad jokes. And so I think it was just, that's where
Yeah.
that started coming from. I just wanted to be able to write from a space where other Métis, whether it's students, and actually I've had more comments from the adults who've read it than
Mm.
students, which is actually really cool. Like I've had emails and responses back from parents who said, I read this to my kid and I kept laughing out loud at some of the things that you wrote, right? Or I remember this as a kid, it was so familiar to me. I love that I'm able to connect people back to their roots. Even
Mm.
people who aren't Métis, they're able to say, I saw such connections between your family and my family. And I was like, well, that's what I actually wanted to do. I said, in writing it, I wanted to be able to bring people into our kitchen. Because for us, especially Métis, being around the kitchen, being around food is very important.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that's why I said, I want to invite people into our kitchen and come eat with us and come laugh with us. And that's basically how, when I write the book, that's what I always keep in mind. I want people to be able to come and enjoy the time that they have with our Métis family and see that we're really just hilarious people.
No.
We're a lot of fun to be
That
around.
that trauma response of like, better say something funny.
Yeah.
Like,
You know how
like,
much trauma it took to be this hilarious?
yeah. I feel like I was like, am I funny or am I just like deeply traumatized and this has been passed down to me to this is how I have to behave.
Oh no, we're funny. I think we're funny from the get-go. It's just that's just a little sprinkle on top.
Yeah. Yeah. Were there any, like, speaking of, yeah, like writing the children's book and things like that, were there any stories that were like passed down to you or maybe inspired you as like when you were younger? You said you started writing from like a young age that have influenced you that you look back on and like, oh, like that was really something that inspired you to become a writer.
Like the first book, 20.12, that was based on my dad's stories, right? So it's not a memoir. People always have to remember that. It's historical fiction. So I took bits and pieces of my dad's stories and then recreated them.
Hmm.
Right. So, but I grew up hearing those stories all the time. Like, because I worked construction with him throughout my high school years, my summer job was working with my dad. And he would always tell me about, how he grew up on the road allowance. And it's as a kid, I was storing the stories, but I never really paid attention to him, right? It's like we
Hmm.
listen to our parents, but we don't listen, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I became an adult when I started remembering all those stories. And then I started questioning him. And thank I'm just so thankful that I had the chance to write it and actually have it printed the year before he passed away.
Hmm.
So for him to actually hold it and read it was a big deal for me. So yeah, just being able to pass down his stories. And the whole plan behind that was just to be able to, the original reason I started recording those stories and writing them down was actually just supposed to be for my kids.
Hmm.
So, because I want them to know, they're only like 1 degree separation from the parents, both their grandparents, who grew up in a very, very different time.
Mm.
I said, your Muslim who you sit with and have meals with all the time is the same man who's in these stories who grew up in a shack with dirt floor and a wood burning stove and no running water. And, they lived on, the road a lot. I want you to remember that's where he came from and how much they had to rise up out of in order to bring me here and in order to bring you here. And that's the only reason why I actually started writing those stories. So, and then with Maggie Lou, a lot of that is inspired by growing up. Like most of the things that happened in there actually happened in my childhood or in my daughter's life, like the hunting or the boxing or learning construction and the funny things that happened just between family members and stuff. So I use a lot of life memories or experiences throughout my stories. And then there's some not so good ones, like my one short story called The Unraveling. It was written or it was published in the Grain winter publication in this past 2024. And again, it's inspired by my mom's story, but it's not her story. So
Mm.
basically, it was because I asked her permission to before I wrote it. She was forced by the church to be married at the age of 16. And she told us like her community was run by the church and, she got pregnant at 16, so she had to get married. The one part that that sparked the whole story to get written was she told me, I don't remember anything but the clicking of my heels walking down the tile floors
Mm.
in the church. And she goes, I don't even know if I said I do. She goes, I fainted in the church. She goes, I woke up in the back afterwards. So to me, I'm just like, oh my gosh, my heart, just fell to think of 16-year-old girl having to go through that because the church, forced her to do this, right? It was so that's like I said, I write everything from really funny children's stories, something a little bit darker.
Yeah. Back to your roots when you were in, ninth grade, just writing your
Yeah,
dark stories. Everybody's
exactly.
everybody's concerned about you, just like, oh. I think it's like
Yeah.
therapeutic too as a writer, because like you said, like you write what you know and you're able to like there's so many things that I've written that I'm like, oh, like am I gonna have to wait for like half my family to die before I can like
Yeah.
release this? Like they're
Exactly.
slowly dying, but I'm just like they're gonna read this or see this and be like, hey, like is that me? Like,
I think that's so important for people to realize too, how important the arts are, whether it's writing or visual arts or film, because it's such a healing process. Like as much as we talk about trauma, I think people it's so important to realize that there's such healing that comes through it. It's not just
mm,
about trauma. And I always tell people, like with my art exhibit, I tell them, I said, the reason why I tell truths within my stories is not to build sympathy. And when I go to schools and I talk to students and I ask them, what's the difference between sympathy and empathy? And I get them to describe those two words. And I said, okay, exactly. I said, I never tell a story in order for you to have sympathy, because that's feeling sorry for
mm.
someone. I said, what I want you to do is I want you to build up empathy in your life, to be able to walk beside us during our stories and hear our truths, and to be able to walk with us and understand the things that we've gone through. We can't change them, but we can grow from them. But that's what I love about storytelling in whatever medium you use to tell those stories. It's such a healing and beautiful way to share who we are.
For like 20.12, like you kind of discussing like your dad's story, like of as a road allowance Métis and like your family's story, I think kind of helps educate because I think there are a lot of people who just, I think just Canadian history in general maybe don't understand like what's happened in the past.
Is when I actually first shared the one short story um, in Guy Vanderhey's class, it kind of took the students back. Like it was a small class. It was only 12 students. There was special admission to get into it. And these students who, like, again, we're all well-versed students. Like we're not talking, 18, 19-year-old students. We're talking, you know,
Mm,
adults or people who are far into their degrees and stuff. And just when they sat down and they listened, they had no idea when I discussed the story Apples and Train Tracks, when I first shared it. I gave the history of the road allowance people and what happened in Saskatchewan in the 1940s during the Douglas administration. They had no clue. And actually, one person did take offense
Mm.
because Tommy Douglas was listed as one of, Canada's greatest Canadians or whatever it was, right? So they took great offense to it. I'm like,
Yeah.
I was like, you can't take offense to something. It happened. It's history. It's truth. I said, so that's the only reason why I'm sharing it.
Yeah.
And there was, we talked afterwards, everything was fine. But at first it was just, I think for them, it was just such a shock because they've never heard it before. And then once some of the schools started using the books in their classrooms, I was called into a couple classes because the teachers messaged me and they said, we didn't, she goes, I didn't even know about the road allowance Métis. She's like, and I'm an educator. She's like, she's like, I
Mm.
feel like foolish that I don't know about this. And this is my province. And she said, and I went through my history book that I'm supposed to be teaching, for our curriculum. There is one paragraph on road allowance Métis. She's like, would you come in and please share your
Mm.
stories and what you know and understand with it? So it was really cool to be able to go in and do that. And actually, because then now I work with the South Teachers Federation and doing workshops with the educators with storytelling, but also with a little bit with Métis history. So we teach about script. I've created a game in order to teach kids how script worked and how it was fraudulently taken away from Métis people. So but it's a game where I get them to run all around the school. We have some
Mm.
who get script and it's written in the font Wingdings where there's like makes no sense, right? So they open it
Yeah.
up and they can't read it, right? Because I had to, and then after they didn't get it, and then the next one it was one where a woman loses her treaty because she married someone who was Métis. And then they all get stuck in this corner, right? Eventually they realize that it's the road allowance. Another one is they go to the library, then it tells
Mm.
them to go to the front office, and it tells them to go to this office, and then it comes back over here. And then it tells them, okay, well, your land is now, a 4-day travel by horse and carriage. Do you want it? Right. So I was trying to show them how fraudulently it was taken away from them, whether because they had to go try and find the script first. And then it was, they had to go to the land commission's office, right? And in order to find out where their land is, which was usually so far away from where they actually live. And then, well, then they would give it up because that's not where their families are, right? And then,
Yeah.
explaining how, my hookup ended up on the road allowance, that she married someone who was Métis. He was from the Lestock road allowance, so they had to live on the road allowance because she was no longer allowed on the reserve. And that's, just how they ended up landless. Those who didn't understand the language, because they spoke Michif and then they received the script and they didn't understand what that paper meant, someone would come along and then another student would play the uh what is it, a land speculator who would come in and basically cheat them out of their script, and he'd give them gold coins, and then he would go turn it in at the end to the land commission office, and then he would get a huge pile of chocolate gold coins, and then everyone's like, oh, we got ripped off. I'm like, yeah, it's exactly what happened. And they're all stuck in this little
Yeah.
tiny corner of the classroom, and it's just such a good way to be able to explain to them how it actually happened and that they can tangibly
Yeah.
walk through the steps. So I love that I've been able to open up that little book has opened up so many different doors within the schools and the students to understand. So
Apples and Train Tracks is, yeah, one of the stories that you've taken and, yeah, turned into exhibit and things like that. Why did you pick, like, it sounds like that was kind of the first story that you wrote for the book, like your short story collection.
I think that one became so important just because I've started realizing nobody knew about it.
Mm.
Like I grew up knowing about it, right? I knew where my dad was from. I knew what he went through. It's like to me, I thought everybody knew what happened in 1940 in Saskatchewan. That they got shipped up by cattle cars with what they could hold and that their houses was burnt down and like, but nobody knew. And I was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
how come people don't know about this? So it just became such, I think, a pivotal point for the book. And then when I went out to Punachai, they invited me to come out to the school so I could do a reading. And um, there was a gentleman from the community, Ken Folden. He contacted me and he wanted to take me on a tour of the town, because he said, I want you to consider this your home because this is where, your father was from. It was really, really sweet. Took me on a tour of the museum there that they have, which is actually absolutely amazing. It's the old church, but they have so many old artifacts in there and so many news articles that I read through. Um, but then, because I told him, I said, my dad's shack is still standing. Can we go see it? And we went there. And I guess the mayor at that point, I don't know if he still owns it, but the mayor owned that land. It's an old farmland. And I was telling him the story about, gosh, this must have been, okay, how old? Okay, I'm 50. My dad must have been like 30 years. Like I was close to, no, no, I would have been 30. So 20 years ago. It would have been 20 years ago. I took my dad down to Punachai and because I wanted to take pictures of him in front of that old shack before he passed away. Of
Mm.
course I did. It was all great. We were leaving and I wanted to steal the doorknob so bad off that door. Like that's all I could see was my Kokum holding it. I love my Kokum Bella. And all I could see was her hand grabbing onto that doorknob every time she'd leave to go to work. And every time she came home, I wanted that doorknob so bad. And I told my dad I wanted to take it. He's like, no, you can't steal anything. So my dad wouldn't let me take it.
It's
I'm
his
like, fine.
door. Like,
Yeah. And then so we were leaving, and then there was a piece of wood. It's so funny. It's a piece of wood hanging off the top. And I ran back and I grabbed because it was falling off anyways.
yeah.
I ripped it off and I threw it in the back of the truck. And my dad's yelling at me, what the hell are you doing? You can't steal that. I'm like, it's gonna fall off anyway. Anyways, so 20 years, that it was like probably 6 feet long piece of old wood from my dad's old shack traveled with me for 20 years. And we've probably moved 3 or 4 different times plus overseas. That piece of wood's still with me. But then what happened is when I got invited back, Ken took me to the old shack and I told him the story about me wanting to take the doorknob. He called the mayor right away and told him about me, and they all knew why I was there. And then the mayor told him, well, she can take whatever she wants if she wants the doors and windows.
Mm.
And I'm like, really? So I loaded up the doors and windows and brought them home. I didn't have a clue what I was doing with them. I'm like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm bringing them home. I'm bringing my dad's home to me.
Yeah.
And then they sat in my living room and I just started getting images and then I had the story. I already had the idea to do the short narration film. And we went back and got footage when we were there, me and my friend Sean Pillar. But then just as I sat there, just more like all the images just started, like as an artist, right? You just start getting these images and the story was playing and then the window and then my dad's old photos. And I just started laying it all out. And then I ended up with a whole art exhibit and I didn't know what to do with it. It was in my living room. Contacted Wanuskewin, told them about it, pitched it to them. They said yes. And so, yeah, so it was in Wanuskewin for last summer. And then right now it's at Alan Sapp Gallery in North Battleford. And then it is heading to Batoche. So it's going to be in Batoche for the whole summer. And then Red Deer Gallery is, I think we're trying to get it in there closer to the end of the year or the beginning of 2026. And then possibly 1 or 2 galleries in BC.
Why is Métis representation so important to have in your work?
It's my identity, it's who I am, right? So it's for me, it's just second nature. It's part of me. But I think what is important for people, especially in Canada, to realize is right. I don't like it when they lock us all in as we're all Indigenous, right? That pan-Indigenous name. It's like we're I want people to be able to appreciate and understand how diverse and how beautiful all Indigenous people across Canada are, right? I just want to be able to have a little representation from our little corner here on the prairies. Little bias, like when I do write, it is more, prairie orientated then. And that's what I kind of talk to as well, that you might be Métis and like my family, Yes, my dad is from Panachai, so the road allowance there. But my mom's family is from Saskatchewan, which is Isle Cross. So I'm more familiar with that. So, and with the Northern Michif. So that's why the Northern Michif is worked into Maggie Lou, um, because that's just what I grew up with. So it's like, but I want to be able to people to see just how beautifully diverse and wonderful our people are. I actually had the chance to write a book called Metis, The People and the Nation, through Saunders Books. And I was able to try and do it as a real Reader's Digest version. So it's really, really short, but I crammed in as much information as I could for Metis from all across Canada, right? But unfortunately, yes, I was a little biased. There's a lot more pictures and stuff of people from here in Saskatchewan and stories like stories from up north. Some of my aunties, I got them to tell the story of our bread pudding that we have every Christmas. So, like I said, it's a little bit biased, but I love that I was able to write that. And then also include stories that another fact that a lot of people forget is that Métis people were also in residential schools and in day schools, right? That kind of gets forgotten. So that's important for me to tell as well. So,
I think too, I was talking to like a Métis filmmaker, Andrew Konoff, and he's writing a film about his great grandfather who was in a residential school, but he had like blonde hair.
mhm.
So he's Métis and he's in this residential school, but he looks like a white kid, right? So it's he told me like his great grandfather like ran away from the school because he was like yeah, he was like obviously getting treated bad because he was in a residential school and he's also getting
Yeah.
bullied by the kids in the residential school.
In the next book. So Maggie Lou book 2 comes out in the fall. It's called Maggie Meets Her Match. And that's kind of one of the elements I brought in there again, just because I want to be able to show how diverse and beautiful our people are.
Hmm.
Is Maggie's cousin gets married, like married into her family, and she's a fair-skinned redhead, right? And it's just
Yeah.
something that I grew up knowing. Like you didn't have to look Indigenous to be Indigenous, but that's just because
Yeah.
that's what I grew up with, right?
When I was growing up, like get called by my cousins and my aunties and uncles like white squaw because it's like, well, you're whiter, like light skin, and like even within your own family, you kind of are like, oh, we're like a mix, diverse looking
Yep.
looking people.
Yeah.
Like just getting bullied by my own family members. Like,
We're so horrible. We call each other such mean
yeah.
names. You have to have tough skin because, man, I won't say who it is in my family, but in our family, like you're the two nicknames that were given were Fatso and Minnow. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like people are like, oh my gosh, it's just you must have been bullied in your half. I'm like, it's just part of the teasing.
Yeah.
I don't know, it was just funny.
And
It's
I feel like you have to toughen each other up for the outside worlds. Like,
the outside world is much worse than our family. So you're just helping each other. That's all.
yeah, like they're doing you a favor. Yeah, so when you go around to these places, you talked a bit about like adults reading Maggie Lou Firefox, but yeah, what has been like the general, like have you had a lot of feedback from like either the Métis community or maybe non-Indigenous people? You said, yeah, some people were like, "Oh, like I've never heard this story before." How has been, yeah, the response to some of your stuff?
For all of it, it's been, I don't know, I've had a lot of really good feedback. Um, like I know for Maggie Lou right now, book 2's coming, and like right now we're in development of it becoming an animation. I'm so excited.
Nice.
That's a big part of it. Um, but like I said, every place that I've gone to do readings for it, like the last classroom I was in, actually, I'm going to be an artist in the classroom now with this particular school here in Saskatoon because their classroom and school love the book so much. And we're going to do a program with them in the fall, but just all the kids and majority of the class, like they're a very diverse class. There was a lot of there was Middle Eastern, there was Asian students that, it was so diverse in that class. There was like maybe just a handful of Indigenous
Hmm.
students, but I loved how all of them could relate to Maggie Lou and her family and the food and the laughter and the nicknames. So that's what I love about the story, is that it's all encompassing, that everyone can relate to it, but they love that they're able to learn about our Métis households and our language. So that's been the best part. Like, they were so excited. I had tons of pictures and letters sent to me. And then, like I said, this fall, I'm going to be working as the artist in classroom, and we're going to do a little program called Story is Medicine. So again, it's just another curriculum that I'm still in the middle of designing, but being able to use kind of the medicine wheel and doing the 4 elements of story, and then how to build that with students and show that there are 4 different, well, there's a lot of different ways you can tell story, but with them, we're going to get them to build story through a play, through oral storytelling, but use it in a radio style of storytelling, and then use art, and then the written word. Because I want to be able to also show them that when you write stories, it doesn't have to always just be the written word. There's so many ways that we can write stories. So that's what I love about being able, again, that people are able to relate to the story, and the teacher is the one who contacted. Again, it's a lot of teachers contacting me that have read it, and librarians who end up calling me in and then getting students. I actually had a librarian, a couple students from BC write to me, which has been great. Like, she said, you've opened up another world for this little Métis girl who found a book that she could relate to. And she was just so excited, and she's even more excited that book 2 is coming out. So that's why I love writing. So when you hear stories like that someone else, finally they feel like they've been seen.
You said the second book was coming out. Is that?
The second book comes out, I think, late summer. I think it's August release date. So we're just kind of heading into the final edits. I think final edits are done. I'm no longer allowed to change anything. They've cut me off because I keep like, hey, what about this? If you keep letting me read something, I'll keep changing it. I think that's just our nature, right? So the point where you just got to leave it alone. I play that's going to be out next year, which is great. And then I'm actually working on a short to get, hopefully we're going to start, get it produced this summer. So that one is Kiskisawina, which means memories in Cree. Again, it's more on the road allowance, what happened during the 1940s, but it's following a love story that happens during that time when they're being forcibly removed from the road allowance. So, and I'm all excited because we're actually going to do it all in Michif with English subtitles. So yeah.
Merci, Arnolda, for sharing your story with us today. Storytelling is a powerful tool that can heal our nation. As we heard from Jason in the last episode, it is not often that Métis people get to express our history. If you want to read Arnolda's short story collection, 20.12, you can visit the Gabriel Dumont Institute. And if you happen to be in Batoche this summer, you can visit Arnolda's Apples and Train Tracks exhibit. And don't forget, this August, Arnolda's second book from the Maggie Lou Firefox series will be released wherever you buy your books. Merci for listening, and we'll see you down the river. This episode was written and hosted by Samantha Loney, with music composed by Etienne Beausoleil. It was produced by the Métis and Me program with support from 880 Cities and the Rural Ontario Changemakers. Remember to like and subscribe for more content. Merci for listening.